Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? We are live. We got UFC Vegas 165 this weekend, and this is the Club and Sub podcast, episode 115. Usually I do those two things in reverse. That was weird. I don't know. Must have my excitement for this show, which I'm more excited to do this show than I am to actually watch this card this weekend, get in the way. As usual, you got me, John, and MMA Fox, Luke at SWR underscore betting, Lags at Danny underscore Lags. All of that is on Twitter. We're brought to you guys by betonline.ag for a 50% bonus up to your first $1,000 deposit. Use the promo code CLUBSUB. And tonight we're breaking down UFC Vegas 65. We're coming off what was a really fun card at UFC 281. Had, I believe, I want to say 8 finishes in that card. So it was a fun time. You know, I had my heart broken in the main event and also broke my bankroll a bit in that main event. But anyway, we move on to Sergey Spivak versus the Black Beast, Eric Lewis. Really, really fascinating stuff here. Card could definitely be better. Luke, what are your thoughts on it?
So
you're muted.
Yeah, I'm not like the one to like overtly complain about cards. I try to find as much good in them as possible, but honestly, I think this is one of the worst cards of the year, personally, from an entertainment and betting standpoint. So, yeah.
Lags, you?
I would definitely echo those sentiments as well. Like, it's not a great card to watch. I don't think it's a great card to bet, but you know, I know we talk about it week in and week out, but I think this week in particular, you're going to see a lot of recency bias, whether justified or not, in a lot of these matchups.
Yeah, agreed all around. You know, I've only made 2 bets so far. A couple others I'm considering, but really kind of depends on lines and just, how risky I really am feeling on this card. So, with that, we'll jump right in. First fight of the night, we got Natalia Silva. She's coming off a win over Jasmine Jonzavicius, taking on Teresa Bleda, who's making her debut. Honestly, I kind of think the markets doesn't really know what to do with this fight. You know, Sean and I were talking about this a bit earlier, literally about this dynamic. Because if you look back to Silva's first fight, I think she was plus 220 against Jasmine. And as everybody knows, Jasmine is not really that good. But a lot of people thought Jasmine was value in that spot entering the fight. And I think for good reason, because Silva's regional tape was quite poor. But she had 3 years off. She came in, looked pretty good, used the big cage well, stuffed Jasmine's takedowns, won a clean 30-27. For me, though, I'm just still not really, that's a lot of weight to make her a favorite now, to turn around and have the market acting like, she should be a favorite. It's a lot of weight to put in one fight against a fighter who isn't that good. And on the other side, you have Bleda, and I faded Bleda on Contender Series. I'm not particularly high on her, but she is a wrestler and she has a heavy top game. And the one thing we didn't really see answered in that Silva Jasmine fight was whether or not Silva's still a guard player, because basically her default every time she was taken down pre-UFC was to basically just hunt for arm bars from bottom. And I kind of think Bleda floats on top pretty well. And if she gets there and Silva does that, she has a lot of scope to just be able to float there and ride out rounds on top. And so I don't know. Like, I look at the tape and I think Silva's a far more talented fighter, but on the other side, she's taking on a giant in Bleda who will wrestle and who I think is probably a better wrestler than Jasmine is and certainly has a better top game. So I'm not making a play here. I understand why people are high on Silva, but again, I think, for the market to overcorrect from Silva being 30% against Jasmine Jonzavicius to 60% here, I don't know. It's kind of weird to me. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. It just kind of depends on, one, how much stock you put into the last fight, and two, truly how much better has Silva gotten. I think like the dynamic, essentially why it is flipped though, because I think the dynamic is still kind of similar, where obviously Silva answered some of those questions in the last outing, but at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people, I just want a bigger sample. It's one of those situations with Silva where it's like, I don't even know how relevant her regional tape is anymore. There's certain aspects of it that could be, there's certain aspects, we just don't have enough of it there yet. So I kind of skimmed through this fight pretty quick just because I can't lay chalk on Silva here by not having that sample. On the flip side, Bleda's only 20 years old, man. I'm not betting on a 20-year-old debutante. I can't do it. But yeah, you made all valid points. She could definitely come out here and potentially actually be able to land takedowns and look good on top. It's kind of a bit of a binary fight. So if not, though, I think Silva probably handles her pretty well on the feet.
Lags, what do you think? Lags? Is he frozen right now? I see he's upside down. He's upside down on my screen. I'm not sure what's happening here. All right. Well, Wags is now out of the picture. So we'll move on to the next fight. We got Fernie Garcia taking on Brady Highstand. Highstand's coming off, I believe, a loss by split decision on the Ultimate Fighter to someone else who we'll get to later in the card. Fernie Garcia coming off a debutante loss to Journey Newson. We got Lags back, though. Lags, you want to break that down real quick?
Yeah, sorry, because I saw Luke freezing a little bit, and I was like, oh, shit, is he about to leave? And then I started freezing, and then I'm completely lost. I'm like, I had to pull this off. Yeah, so starting off the top, like kind of what I mentioned before the pod a little bit. Like I think this is a card of recency bias, and I mean, kind of rightfully so. Like we see in the last fight, Jazz the Vicious, decent wrestler, nothing great, and Silva used solid footwork, solid striking, defended the takedowns well, had nice sprawls, and I guess kind of what you talked about, John, a little bit with Bleda's wrestling maybe being a little bit better than Jasmine. I think it's comparable. So to me, I don't know. I think the line's kind of fine, to be completely honest.
All right. Moving on. Garcia Highstand. Luke, what do you got?
Interesting fight. Honestly, in kind of listening to some other people talk about it, though, I think the Fernie guy's getting just a little bit of a bad rap from some people. Like, I don't think he's as bad as people are talking about. In fact, I think he actually probably wins the stand-up here at a decent clip if it's a 15-minute range kickboxing match. I don't like Highstand striking really at all. He's pretty reckless. We saw him get hurt by Tercios, who historically doesn't hurt people. He got hurt by Rettinghouse. He's just so available to be hit, and that just kind of plays right into that kind of lip of the pocket game of Fernie Garcia, who I think is faster and is more technical, who I do actually think hits harder. I know he's had like a ton of decisions and not many knockouts, but I do think he stands a guy that's actually going to get knocked out probably in the very near future, assuming there hasn't been some more evolutions made there. At the same time, I think he stands just kind of one of those relentless like grinders, up down mat return, where he's just going to go out and push a pretty crazy pace, force a ton of shots, really make guys work. Fernie's get-up game historically to date has been pretty decent, but I think he stands pretty clearly the best wrestler grappler archetype he's fought to date. So I kind of lean more to the Highstand side, but not a super strong take. And I think it's also interesting to note too with Highstand, he's coming off that layoff due to ACL surgery. I guess the last 3 fights he fought, well, obviously 2 in the house and the one against Tercios was actually on a bum knee. So I would anticipate we actually probably see a better version of Brady Highstand too if he's actually got 2 fully healthy legs. That can do nothing but help, I would assume. But yeah, like I said, I still think people are not giving Fernie enough respect here, in my opinion. So I think the fight being lined competitively, it makes sense. I think honestly the line on Highstand is a bit high.
Lags, how about you?
I actually played Brady. One unit small at -160. Yeah, I think he has all the wrestling upside here, and quite frankly, I think Fernie's cardio isn't that great either, and Brady's going to push a pace that he hasn't really seen before. So to me, I think Brady in the wrestling should be able to get it done, whether that's a late finish or just dominant decision. I like Brady in the spot.
I thought about Brady, and I do think in terms of the grappling, like I'm pretty positive Brady can get him down relatively easily. Whether he can hold him down is a different story. I don't really have a good read on Garcia's jiu-jitsu, and so like it wouldn't shock me if Brady can get him down and just sub him right away, and it wouldn't shock me if he gets him down and Garcia can consistently work up. And so with that being the case, it's like I think Brady's a deserved fave, but kind of to Luke's point, I don't trust his defense, and I also, he fights through fatigue quite well, but he does get tired every single fight. He comes out and pushes a chaotic pace, and then you look at the round 3 of that Tercios fight, that was insane. So yeah, I think the line's about right. If you got it on Brady, like better than -150 or in that neighborhood, I think that's fine. But yeah, I just don't trust the cardio and defense enough to like make a bet here. Plus, I don't have, I feel like a good enough read on Fernie to confidently take the other side. Moving on though, good fight, women's. Well, I don't know if we call it a good fight, but it's a sloppy fight. We got Maria Oliveira. She's taking on Vanessa Demopolis. Flags, what do you think?
Definitely a sloppy fight, but one where I think the line should probably be flipped because I think, to me, Vanessa in the striking, I think it's competitive enough. But really, her wrestling and just top control in general, I think should be able to win her out this fight. I don't think Oliveira is that good, quite frankly. I think her cardio is not that great. Her work rate's not that great. Her striking is obviously the best part of her game, but it's nothing. It's nothing to write home about, quite frankly. So I like Vanessa again, small in the spot, 1 unit plus 100.
Yeah, I bet Vanessa Small as well here. For me, it's just like I do think Oliveira's pace is okay, but it's a lot of empty volume. She doesn't have much power behind her shot. She doesn't sit down on much. She's very, very hittable. She's a very poor defensive grappler. And on the other side, I know Demopolis catches a lot of flack for her striking, but the truth is, while she is very hittable, she's very, very durable, and she'll bite the mouthpiece herself and let her hands go. I actually think she hits harder by a decent amount than Oliveira in this fight. You go back to watch some of her earlier fights, especially the fight with Godinez in LFA. She was landing bombs on Lupi in that fight, and so I guess the way I look at this fight is I think it's probably competitive on minutes on the feet, and maybe you could edge Oliveira slightly, but I do think Vanessa's more likely to hurt her. I think of the two, the grappling success is firmly in the Demopolis side here. If there is grappling success, I do think she can likely get takedowns. And then you look at the finishing ability here. I don't think, yeah, I can't tell her I can't finish her, but I don't think it's very likely. Whereas Demopolis obviously has a decent chunk of finishing, upside in every single fight, and so a fight that should be competitive on minute standing where the underdog has both the grappling upside and the finishing edge. I think Vanessa's got to be like a 55 to 60% favorite here personally. So small play for me as well. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with the majority of what you guys said. I'm not playing Demopolis personally just because her wrestling historically has just been so bad. Like primarily like what the submission potential of Demopolis has been guard subs. Like we still don't even really know what Vanessa Demopolis looks like on top of anybody. I know she took Frey down, but was only able to keep her there for like 20 seconds or so. So like, but to your point, I think based on the massive size discrepancy in this fight, I think Oliveira is going to have like a 10-inch reach and 4-inch height advantage. I would assume that the game plan of Demopolis is probably going to be, come out here and shoot a bunch of takedowns where if it's kind of almost like a Roxanne Modafferi situation where like she's not a very good wrestler, but if she's just going to relentlessly pursue, kind of the law of large numbers, you can probably project her to land one, maybe two takedowns. And to your point, John, I do think the submission potential is there. It's just, I'm not going to confidently say that she's going to land takedowns, even if she attempts though. Like Oliveira, I would say could be too big. I know Ricci got her down multiple times, but I think Ricci's a much better wrestler than Demopolis is, at least in terms of manipulating weight and having more options for wrestling, just because we have a bigger sample of it. And then I favor Oliveira on the feet personally. So I definitely understand the angle. I don't hate it. I do think it's Demopolis or pass if you are to bet, but at the same time, you're not giving me like a massive number next to her name either to essentially go out there and do something that she pretty much never does. So I'm good to sit back on it.
Moving on, we got a good fight here. I have a bet here. We got Ricky Tercios taking on Kevin Natividad. I bet Tercios here minus 155. I know he got a lot of flack for his last fight against Amin Zahavi, and in fairness, he looked terrible. I think he landed at like a 13% clip. But Tercios, what he is, he's a good scrambler, and he's a heavy, heavy volume striker. And those are things I love to see. The problem with Zahavi fight, Zahavi's ring craft in that fight was quite good, and he was doing a tremendous job of getting off the center and just leaving Tercios nothing to hit, and then countering him fairly well. And while I think Tercios being unable to mount effective offense against Zahavi was troubling, I don't really think Kevin Natividad brings the same kind of threats in the counter game and defensive game that Zahavi does. In fact, the one time we've seen Kevin Natividad go 15 minutes in the UFC or close to 15 in his debut, he landed 33 significant strikes in that fight. Whereas we actually have Tercio is a long sample of a heavy output. And so I look at this fight, and people were laying minus 230 on Tercios against the hobby, but now he's minus 150 on Natividad, and all I'm hearing is Natividad live dog. Well, I think there's a big volume edge for Tercios here. In terms of grappling, like, yeah, Natividad's a better wrestler, and he can get takedowns, I suppose, but I don't think he has the cardio to enforce a heavy grappling pace for 15 minutes. I don't think he's very likely to control Tercios, and I could see him getting put in some bad spots here. And then in terms of power, like, I think Natividad hits harder, but I also think Tercios, or I should say Natividad's pretty fragile. So it's like Tercio's super durable, doesn't hit as hard. Natividad hits pretty hard, but also pretty fragile. I kind of think finishing equity cancels itself out. And I just personally think it's a huge edge here for Tercios on minutes. I put him at about minus 200 here. I think that's fair. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I largely agree with you there as well. I guess I'm one of those people who is just kind of really concerned about the last fight against the hobby. I'm not really sure what that was. Obviously, the longer sample of Tercios, probably gives you a little bit more meat on the bone there. I do think the guy's kind of just a bit of a dummy, a dummy though, personally. And, despite the volume, like, doesn't really have very good defense. He's going to be available to be hit at the same time too. Like, I know Natividad isn't anything special, but like Ricky's, it's kind of been fight dependent on how he's fought guys. But I mean, he'll fight in the phone booth there. And I think Natividad can definitely win in that too, where even, you referenced Natividad only landing 33 against Johns, but Johns is also a guy kind of who plays the outside, is kind of like 1-2 kick move circle, 1-2 kick move circle. Like, that's kind of how he fights too. So he's not necessarily a guy that's like easy to get off on consistent volume against until he potentially gasses and slows down. We'll talk about Mr. Miles Johns later. But I think you might be onto something though, that this actually could just be like a good buy low spot on Tercios because of the last fight. But yeah, because I do agree. I think the volume advantages do lie with him. But Natividad, from a narrative perspective, he's another guy that's coming off of, I guess, a couple elbow surgeries. And I was listening to an interview where he said, like, he's been dealing with it for like the last 2 to 3 years or whatever. And pretty much anytime he would put like his arms up to block kicks or something, sometimes his arms would just go dead. So he kind of had to learn how to like essentially fight with his hands down and just like roll punches. How true is it? How relevant is it? I don't know. I just think that's interesting that you might see a more defensively cognizant Natividad if that is actually true here. But I guess we'll see. I think Tercios being a favorite makes sense. Honestly, out of any fight on the card from a money line perspective, I think Tercios might be one of your better spots.
Lags, what do you think?
So coming from a guy who played Tercios by decision last time out, again, recency bias is a bitch for sure. I thought, like, on paper, Zahabi was a great fight for Tercios to look good against, and he lands 27 of 234. Like, dude, it's embarrassing to rewatch because I remember I'm going through the tape. I'm like, fuck, dude, I had Ricky in this fight, and this was just a horrible fight to watch. So, yeah, to me again, like, I don't really disagree with any points here. It's just that, yeah, little salty about the last one.
Yeah, fair enough. Moving on, we got Miles Johns taking on Vince Morales. Luke, you want to start us off here?
Another fight that there's a little bit of interesting narrative going into it as well. Johns is coming into this one on, I think, roughly 2 weeks' notice. Kind of referenced it before with Miles Johns getting very tired against Santiago, getting very tired against Cole Smith, and utterly death gassing against Castaneda. So I think that's one of the most important things to note, that if you are betting Miles Johns here, you're really hoping that cardio is going to hold for 15 minutes, which it very well may not. However, if it does, I think he actually plays a game that's going to give Vince Morales a healthy amount of issues. Like I said, he kind of plays the outside kick, stick, and move. And the thing with Morales is he struggled to cut off the cage in multiple fights. He's gotten stuck kind of just following guys around at points too. The sense of urgency with Vince Morales just isn't always there. We've obviously seen him susceptible to kicks in the past, which is something Johns will religiously throw. But ultimately, I come away with saying how this fight plays out, I think, is solely predicated on how Vince Morales fights him. I think if Vince goes out here, bites the mouthpiece, makes this dirty, makes it greasy, makes it a dogfight, really pushes Miles Johns, I think he can potentially break Miles Johns in this fight. If he's going to sit there and do the complete opposite, and like he has in certain fights, like he did against Benito Lopez, and just let Benito sit there and kick him and then come in on entry sometimes and fuck around in there, I think Miles Johns is actually going to look pretty good in this fight, and the wrestling upside lies with Johns too. So I actually think this is one of the best live betting fights of the entire card, just because I want to see how Vince is fighting him. I think the first 5 minutes is going to tell you a decent bit.
Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, so for me, historically, like Vince is the guy who isn't pushing that kind of like crazy pace. So for me, I actually like to go to the distance. One unit on that minus 135. Like I just don't see a ton of finishing equity from either side. Like obviously, you touched on the leg kicks for Johns, and to me, that's kind of where I see like the huge finishing equity. Obviously, Morales could KO a death gas Johns, but I think it's a good fight for Miles. Again, the concern with the wrestling is the guy doesn't shoot takedowns because he's afraid of that gas tank. So it's like you're playing with fire either way, short notice, and whether or not he's going to go out there and shoot takedowns. So, but I like the goes the distance.
When I first saw the line, I was pretty tempted by Johns because I had the Anderson Dos Santos fight pretty burned into my head because I bet Dos Santos there, and Johns like obviously kicked his leg off. And I remember thinking when I saw this line, I was like, man, I think we all know it's hard to trust Vince against anybody that throws leg kicks at this point. But I had like recalled Johns being a more proactive leg kicker than he was, and like that's really the only fight. And even in that fight, I believe he only threw 18 leg kicks across 3 rounds. So it's like they're hard leg kicks, but he's not super proactive about it. Maybe he will be here because like the Morales weakness is such a known thing at this point that it's hard to discount. My problem with Morales is it's just like it's not even against leg kicks. There are a lot of guys in the UFC who have managed to make careers despite an inability to check leg kicks. He just, if you're getting kicked, you have a couple options. You can return fire with a kick. You can check it. If you can't do that, you can play all the way out or all the way in or pressure hard. Morales instead seems to kind of, when he starts getting kicked, play this like halfway in between deer in the headlights game, which just lets him get kicked even more. And like I do think Vince Morales has had the tools to win some of these fights he's lost where he couldn't stop kicks. And I think he has the tools to win here. My problem with Morales is it's an issue of consistency for me. Like you look at, I know he won. I think we all bet him there. But like the Draco Rodriguez fight, he didn't really have much urgency to him. He outpointed him, but like that should have been a much easier fight than it ended up being. And then you have a fight like the Smolka fight where he comes out biting the mouthpiece and letting his hands go. If he comes out here aggressively, I think he is the better boxer than Miles Johns this year. I do not think Miles Johns can hold him down on the mat. I think he's probably a lot more durable than Miles Johns. I think he has better gas than Miles Johns has. And so it's really a question of which guy we're going to see. Because like I don't know what you guys think, but like I don't think Johns, he's got good metrics and he obviously has a nice jab, but he doesn't have much diversity to his striking. It's like, Luke, you mentioned when we were talking about the Tercios fight, it's really just like jab, kick, cross, and that's really all he has. And if you can cut that off, you saw it took, what's his name? Who we fought last fight.
Castaneda.
Yeah, Castaneda figured it out after about 5 minutes and was like, oh, this is actually pretty easy, and then just proceeded to pick him apart. And I think, the tools are there for Morales here. It's just, I'm at a point with Vince where it's just like, how can I trust this guy against a guy that I know throws hard leg kicks? I think I bet him against Jonathan Martinez in his last fight, and I'm like, okay, Martinez throws kicks, but he's there naked to be countered, and didn't even really try to counter him in that fight. Just let him chew his legs off. So I don't know. I've considered a Vince play. I would probably need like plus 185 to do it. I saw Pepe earlier today mention he liked Morales ITD, and I actually think that's kind of an interesting way to play it because you're getting. It's at plus 500 at places, and I do kind of think if Morales takes the path he needs to take to win this fight, a Morales win is probably a finish a decent chunk of time, right? So I think Morales ITD is pretty interesting, but I lean the Morales side. I'm done trusting him, to be honest. Moving on, though, good fight here. We got Jennifer Maia. She's taking on Marina Morose. Lags, what do you think?
I think the line's maybe a bit over, a bit outblown for Morose, but like I'm done thinking Maya's really like that good. Quite frankly, she's a girl that's not going out there using her wrestling, just like we were talking about with Miles Johns. And her boxing is, while it is quite good, it's kind of low volume. So I think Morose is very live to outwork her. She's live to out wrestle her as well. Yeah, I think it's again recency bias spot we see in her last fight, smoking Agapova on the ground. I think she definitely has the tools to out wrestle Maya here as well, but we will see.
Yeah, it's another one where I kind of got mild interest in Maya here, but I'm not sure I'll pull the trigger. Like I don't think Maya's the most skilled fighter in the world, but the women Jennifer Maya has been fighting in the UFC are considerably better than the women that Marina Morose has been fighting. And it's not like she's not competing. She got beaten up by Fialho, and in the second Jacoby fight, but the first fight was competitive. She beat Alexis Davis when that was still something worth talking about. She's a decent boxer. She can match volume. She can throw volume. And she's a decent grappler. And she's been fighting elite competition. And you have Morose coming off dumpstering Agapova, who I'm pretty sure anybody in this division can grapple if they really want to at this point. And it's like the market's probably too high on her. But with that said, we do know Morose is a good boxer. She's from the Ukrainian boxing team originally. She's very big for the division. She's bigger than Maya is by a decent amount. And I do think from an athleticism and ceiling perspective, Morose's is a good bit higher than Maya's is. So from that perspective, I think it's I have some trepidation just because I do think she has a considerably higher ceiling. Like I don't think a Maya sub is very likely here or her out wrestling Morose. So you're really kind of like holding out for like a greasy close decision. But I think Maya's the side. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, this is another tricky one. I like originally going into before I watched any sort of tape, I kind of thought that this was like classic recency bias, buy low spot on Jennifer Maya, coming off of losses to legitimately the three best girls in the division. It's a step down in competition. She's a dog. Morose has looked good. We've seen this spot before, bet Maya, but I don't like Jennifer Maya, man. She can wrestle a little bit, but she doesn't do it. Her grappling is decent for what it is, but once again, she just doesn't really use it. She's also a girl that just doesn't really make like mid-fight adjustments. I don't know why my camera just went blurry, but that's kind of weird. I'll just power through it right now. But my problem with her is she doesn't like make any like mid-fight adjustments. It's like either she's going to pretty much go out there and do what she's going to do and she's going to win, or she's just going to do what she's going to do and lose. Like there just isn't really much there. But I do think the stand-up is competitive here though, because in the defense of Maya, the last three girls that have obviously had success against her in Fialho, Chuk, and Shevchenko, let alone being the best strikers in the division, all three of those girls play different games than Marina Morose does. Like I think Marina Morose is going to be more available to be hit than all three of those girls. So I do anticipate the stand-up actually to be competitive here. I lean to Morose for just being a little bit longer. I like that she digs the body. I think she does just a little bit more. And then I think obviously you would have to lean to Morose for having more potential wrestling upside in this fight as well. So I think a slight fave Morose makes sense, but I do think the line is a bit wide. I think you're probably looking at like a 29-28 type of decision fight. So I wouldn't want whatever Morose is now, like what, 170, 180 or something.
Like that, yeah.
I wouldn't play that. I think it is dog or pass despite me picking Morose.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on. We got Zhalgas Zhumagulov taking on Charles Johnson. Another one where I don't have the best read, but I kind of lean to the Zhumagulov side. Not sure I'll bet him at this number. Big concern for me here. Like, look, I bet Charles Johnson against Mama Makayev. I obviously think fairly highly of him in terms of like as far as 31-year-old fighters with only one UFC fight go. But he's big for the division. He's a good boxer, pretty high output. He's dangerous with his hands. He's a decent defensive grappler, though as we saw in his last fight, he can be taken down. Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this fight, the big concern on the Zhalgas side of things is just the volume. We see it every fight with him. The guy just doesn't really let his hands go enough to ever put stamps on rounds, and volume is something Charles Johnson like specializes in. So I think it's plus, it's a big size difference here as well. So I think those are problematic things for Zhalgas here. But on the other side of that, Zumagulov will wrestle. We saw him do it against Jeff Molina, and I think he can pretty likely get takedowns here. Whether he can control Johnson for extended periods, I'm not sure. But I do think he can kind of make this an edgy, greasy type fight where he might be able to, get 3-4 takedowns, get a decent amount of clinch control, and then manage to keep minutes close enough to steal this fight. I guess, like I said, for me, the problem with Zumagulov is a guy who should never be a big plus to anybody because he's pretty decent everywhere and he always is going to fight close. But also, he's a guy who's almost impossible to favor against everybody because while he's decent everywhere, his minute-to-minute work rate is so low that he always fights close. I don't know. I'm kind of tempted here. I kind of want a better number, but Zhumagulov's fought far better competition, had success against far better competition than Charles Johnson has. He's got the grappling upside in theory. It's just really a question of like how comfortable do you think he'll be able to deal with Charles Johnson's volume? And I'm not really sure. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, it's another tough one for me. I kind of came away with saying that this probably should be closer to a pick'em, to be honest with you. I think you kind of summed it up well with Zhalgas, is that because he's so well-rounded, like you're not going to sit there and just really get off on extended volume against him. He's very durable outside of getting smoked by Kopp, but it's like whatever. Kopp's like one of the biggest finishers in the division for a small dude who's a massive athlete. But by and large, he's a tough guy to finish. If guys have wrestled him, even back on the regionals, he's pretty reliable to work back to his feet, get to the cage. So yeah, he fights in a way that makes fights close. But to your point as well, like based on his style, his upside in fights is pretty much a split decision. Like because he doesn't have big power. Yeah, he can wrestle, but he's got really no submission grappling upside. He's not going to go out there and pace anybody, right? So that's the thing when you're betting a guy like Zhalgas, like you just kind of have to know what you're getting into. You can't really expect him to go out there and like, overperform or blow the doors up for people outside of Jerome Rivera. But Jerome Rivera is one of the worst fighters we've ever seen on the roster. So that's kind of, a mute point. But I actually did go back and do a pretty deep dive into Johnson, and like, there's just certain fights, like the Horiguchi fight was the one that was like really alarming to me, where the thing with Johnson is he kind of has some of these like Bobby Green elements where he just fucks around in there a little bit too much, like the switch stance, the kicks, kind of some empty volume, shoulder rolls. He's there to be hit, so he takes shots, right? But he's just he does what Bobby does, like, oh, it didn't hurt me, but he's still getting hit, right? Like we know Bobby can go out there and out volume people and still lose on the scorecards because he gives me some of those vibes. So honestly, I am going to go with the upset here. I'm going to say Zhalgas finally gets the greasy, close decision he deserves. And that's the last thing I'll say, because people harp on the point that the guy's 1-4 in the UFC. In my opinion, he should be 3-2 in the UFC. I thought he beat Paiva, and I thought he got fucked against Jeff Molina personally. So obviously close fights, whatever, here nor there. But I think people just harp on the 1-4 thing too much, where honestly, if he wasn't 1-4 and got the nod in both those fights, I don't think this line is even the way it is anyway. But I come down with saying it's a super close fight, man. Am I going to get to the window on Zhalgas? Plus 150 would probably be my consideration number, just because.
Yeah, I think that's me too.
I'd want a bigger buffer, if not playing by points. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think he's finishing Charles Johnson personally. I don't hate the goes to 235. I would actually probably prefer that than the money line. I'm honestly thinking of just poning up. I think Daniel Lynn said it in the chat. The goes the distance is like 230, 240, so it's chalky. But to me, this fight hits the cards at a very sizable clip.
Lags, what do you think?
It's actually 200 on most spots. Goes the distance. And actually, look, that was a great comp, the Bobby Green thing, and yeah. Totally. And that's the thing I was actually going to bring up, is he kind of just fights at like a sparring type of pace, which leads himself to close fights. But on the other hand, John put in the Discord this week, it was a great thing on Zumagulov, is that his ceiling's not that high, but his floor is never low. So again, always leads to close competitive fights. So I agree with you guys. I kind of lean that it is a close competitive fight, but I lean more so on the Johnson volume side and defending the takedowns. I think Zhalgas' wrestling is a lot of just cage, pushing you against the cage, not actual control time and keeping him down. So I lean the Johnson side.
Yeah, fair. Moving on, we got a banger here. We got Jack Della Maddalena. He's taking on Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts. Luke, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm largely in the Jack fan camp as much as most people are, but I would say I'm like kind of just like one notch down from everybody because everyone's kind of saying like the guy's completely the second coming. I'm not really willing. I'm not there yet. I think he's very talented, very good. And I've honestly just kind of had a little soft spot for Hot Chocolate Danny Roberts. Like I feel like he doesn't get enough credit though. Like people kind of talk about him like he's like a complete can. I don't think that's the case. I think he's actually reasonably skilled. He's shown, he can defensively grapple at points. He's pretty good in the scrambles. He's a pretty good technical boxer when he wants to be, but that's the problem with Roberts, I would say, is threefold, I would say, is that there's just a ton of these fights where he just says, fuck it. He goes forward. He's not going to use his tools. He's not going to use, the technical ability he does have. He's just going to go forward and he's going to wing a bunch of hooks and bombs. And therefore he's available to be hit. And therefore we've seen him brutally knocked out multiple times, in the last fight against Ronaldo, man, he got hurt significantly to the head twice, significantly to the body once. It's like, we know Ronaldo's going to throw and sling some heavies here and there, but it's like, come on, bro. Like, I mean, he still got hurt way too much in that fight for my liking. And a guy in Jack who's just so slick, he's so fast, he's so technical, also does dig the body. I think Della knocks him out at a pretty decent clip. But I mean, I do think the money line is a bit wide just because Jack also does get hit. We have seen Jack hurt before as well. We've obviously seen him get stuck in some deep chokes. Props to him. He's been able to get out of all of them. Nonetheless, he's still gotten put in some deep shit. So yeah, I mean, put it this way. I'm not parlaying him at like minus 550 or anything like that. I think Jack probably in the 75 to 80-ish% range is probably more fair. Anything above that, I think, is starting to get a little crazy because Roberts, at the end of the day, for better or for worse, he's usually going to go out there and fight. Like, he's going to go out there and get after you for better or for worse. So it's like, I mean, yeah, I'd rather like buy down and take Jack finish props under 1.5, something like that.
Wags, what do you think?
I agree with everything Luke was saying there, but see, my issue with the finish props is, at least looking at it from a betting perspective, they're by KO is like minus 200. Like, I think they're all priced in like fairly accurately. Like, I don't think Roberts' chin is that great. I don't know. I think it's maybe a bit wide, but I don't think Roberts' chin durability is that great. I think Jack makes fairly easy work of him. But let's hear the hot take, John.
I guess it's a hot take since Della Maddalena is minus 550, but I mean, I'm definitely betting Roberts here. I mean, I am. It's funny too because like I don't even think I'm like anti-Jack. Some of his tools, as Luke touched on, are obviously very good for the division. He's a very slick boxer. His output is ridiculous. His body work is sick. These are all knowns, and they're things that should. We'll see how far. It depends how he develops. We'll see how far it takes him, but they should keep him in the UFC for a very, very long time. And he'll probably be ranked at some point as well. Where I diverge from you guys is I think the flaws in Jack's game are fairly sizable to date, at least so far. It's not despite him having a couple of tools that the way he uses them are elite, he also has I think his wrestling is tragic. I said it before the Ameev fight, and Ameev took him down and put him in a deep choke 20 seconds into the fight. And then just wilted to a body shot right after that, unfortunately. But my view on that hasn't really changed. I don't think his bottom game is very good. To Luke's point, I don't think he is the best, most defensively sound fighter in the world, nor do I think he's a crazy beacon of durability either. And so you have Roberts who, look, I don't want to say Roberts is mid. That's probably not fair. I mean, he's been in the UFC for 10 to 12 fights for a while. Roberts has always been a guy that's less than the sum of his parts in my mind. He's a good athlete, hits pretty hard. He's a decent grappler, but he never seems to kind of blend the martial arts, to his advantages. But with that said, I think those tools are enough, and this line is crazy. He's got the power to knock out Jack for sure. Like, no doubt about it. Do I expect him to attempt like 10 takedowns here? No, but would anybody really be blown away if he attempted 3 or 4 takedowns and ended up with like 5 to 7 minutes of control? Like, that is a live outcome, Between Roberts' finishing upside, the fact that he's a decent striker, and the fact that he could conceivably have significant grappling success in this fight, it's very hard for me to put Jack past like minus 200. I think minus 200 is fair on the volume upside and the finishing upside, but I can't go past that with the flaws that are in Jack's game. Now, maybe he cleans them up. He's young enough. He should be making improvements fight to fight. But the certainties that we know here is that both guys hit hard. They're both pretty good athletes. Roberts is a better grappler. Jack's probably more durable. Jack has higher output. That's what we got. So to me, that is not the makings of something that you could ever really price past minus 200. On top of which, despite the fact that Jack may nuke him early, I like the over 1.5 here, man. Plus 100 is kind of crazy to me. Like that is. I mean, tell me if you guys disagree, but you're telling me this goes under 7.5 minutes, 50% of the time? Like, how many times has Danny Roberts been finishing the first round in his career? Once, maybe? Like that's just nuts to me. So I like the over. I like Roberts. I'll be on him here. We'll see what happens. But more hot chocolate. I hear it's great in Vegas this time of year. Moving on. Awesome fight here. Muslim Salikhov. He's taking on Andre Fialho on legs. Any hot takes here?
So I think this could be an awesome fight, but I think this could be a stinker too, because like these guys are both notoriously there for low volume affairs, and so that's kind of my pause on the under. I was looking at the under 2.5. It's like minus 135, minus 140, and like I think Fialho is going to come after him. Pressure. Dude's hittable as well. Salikhov could put him out, but I for me, just the slow movement of Salikhov. I think the durability. Obviously, we see it's going. He's been hurt multiple of his last fights. I think slight fade Fialho is fine. I think the under is probably the best way to look at this fight, though.
Had this fight been booked 2 years ago, I'd be unloading on Salikhov at this number, candidly. Even where it is, I'm not betting it at current number, but I will be betting Salikhov if the line flips and he gets a plus number in front of him. I guess my concerns here, and the reason I'm not, I'll start with is I just really didn't like how Salikhov looked in his last fight. I know he was against Li Jingliang, who's a much better fighter than Andre Fialho is. But to me, Salikhov looked very slow in that fight. He looked old, looked very wooden. And he started to get hurt a bit more in the last couple fights. Obviously, Leach finished him. And so, to me, there are some signs that he is going off a cliff. But with that said, I mean, from a technical standpoint, Salikhov is a significantly better striker than Fialho is. He's probably a significantly better fighter in every realm of MMA, if we're being honest. I think he's probably got as much power. He's a better counter striker for sure. He's a better wrestler. The biggest advantage I see on the Fialho side of things is youth and speed. And I don't really rate Fialho like much at all. I bet Jake Matthews against him. I faded him a bunch. The one thing he can do is he cracks really hard and he's pretty fast. But I mean, Jake Matthews never really known as being a beacon of MMA striking, and the dude absolutely took this guy apart on the feet. Like for 2 straight rounds before he finished him. Like it was easy work. And it's like I look at that, and I shouldn't even say I look at that. I look at like every fight that Fialho has had in the UFC. This guy hasn't run away with a fight in the UFC yet. He had a good round against Pereira and then got owned. He almost got finished by Cameron Van Camp. He got rocked by Baeza before he finished him. And then he got owned by Jake Matthews. Like, Salikhov is a much better fighter. It's just really a question is if the speed and youth are going to be too much here. Like I said, I think he's getting older, and I have real concerns that he might be done. But if it gets to plus territory, I'm going to bet Salikhov. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of my thoughts in general too. I think you guys talked about the fight pretty well. I guess it's kind of where Salikhov is, and when you just write everything out on paper, a pick'em doesn't make really much sense here. It really doesn't. But after I got done looking at it, it's like it kind of reminds me of the trap I fell into for some different reasons, but like when Court McGee fought Jeremiah Wells, like it kind of reminds me of that spot where like I still think Court's a better fighter than Jeremiah Wells. I thought he had more minute winning equity in that fight. I thought he had more decision equity in that fight, but he's fighting a fast, explosive guy who hits hard. Like, so it's like kind of one of these like gambler's dilemma, mental gymnastics type of things that's just gotten me in trouble so many times because I'm like, I can sit here and quantify why Salikhov is a better striker. He's better defensively. He's fought the better guys, right? His strike ratios generally are better. Like there's so many advantages. Salikhov has more wrestling upside in the fight, right? Like you can give so many different advantages to him, but Fialho just has that meme capability at the same time. What I will say though is I successfully faded both guys in their last fights at plus numbers. So it kind of shows where my opinions on both of them are at right now. But I'm largely with you too. I think Fialho's no good. I think he's one-dimensional. Salikhov should win this fight, but I get some really bad vibes. I'm more so looking to the under here, but for kind of what you said, Two Legs, you always have to be a little bit wary with unders when you're at least one of the parties in the fight is going to most likely play an outside game. You know, that's kind of what the concern is there. But to also your point too, John, and why ultimately the big reason why I faded Salikhov against Lee is that he's not the same defensive savant he was 4 years ago. He doesn't have the same speed that he did 4 years ago, which is going to give Fialho, I think, better opportunities to land that bomb. So, yeah, I did take out the variance. I would probably look to the under 2.5.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing here, and it's something like similar to you, what you said about Wells and McGee that I've been trying to avoid. Is it's like someone at Salikhov's age and where he is, his floor could go from being better everywhere. His floor is minus 150 to suddenly his floor is plus 400 because he's just a corpse. You know, like that was the vibe I got in the Leach fight. So at plus money, I feel like obligated to do it. Like, if I get burned by Andre Fialho as a favorite against Salikhov, okay. But yeah. Moving on though, what a fight. Chase Sherman, Waldo Work, Cortez Acosta. Honestly, like, I really want to bet Chase Sherman here, if I'm being honest. Like, I really, really, really want to bet Chase Sherman here. I bet Jared Vandera against Cortez Acosta in his last fight. I think that was a pretty good bet, if I'm being honest. Vandera just, for whatever reason, for the first time in his career, just refused to engage in the kind of work rate he has been known for. But I didn't see much from Acosta in that fight that really changed my mind about him. I think he's an okay boxer. No grappling equity. We learned that he can't check leg kicks at all. And his defense is mediocre at best. I don't think he's particularly fast. And so on the other side, you have Sherman, who, look, there's a litany of things you could say negatively about Chase Sherman. He's defensively void. He's a poor defensive grappler. But he's not going to be in any threat of being grappled in this fight. And honestly, it might be the first time in Chase Sherman's career he is the better grappler in a fight, if we're being completely honest here. He obviously throws very hard leg kicks, and those we have seen work against Acosta. I think his boxing is on a similar level. I think he might hit as hard. I actually kind of think he's got faster hands. Obviously, the guy's fought way better competition. So why am I not betting Chase Sherman? I'll be honest, the line scares the shit out of me. And not that I'm worried about like a fix or anything like that, but what I am worried about is, all I've seen are Chase Sherman takes this week, and deservedly so, to be honest. But the line's moving the other way, which means there is somebody who's sharp, who has got money on this fight, who thinks Acosta deserves to be a big favorite. On top of which, it's the Chase Sherman factor, where it's like the dude could find a way to lose to a one-armed, man in a wheelchair in all likelihood. So I don't know. I might bet him. I just because I'm gonna feel like utter ass if I don't bet him here and he dunks on Acosta. But I am a bit nervous. The line's freaking me out a little bit here. But I do think on paper and in the tape, Sherman has all the tools to win this fight. Or to be honest, he's got all the tools to be lined a favorite in this fight. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, this is the kind of this is the blood pressure one for me. I bet Bandera in the last fight at plus 168, and it's like now, especially with where the line's gone, I had interest, but I wasn't like very interested. But I mean, he's plus 185 at Bet Online right now. Like, it's one of those spots where it's like I kind of almost feel like I have to play Sherman. Like, otherwise I'd be like kind of contradicting myself that I would play Vandera there. And like the thing with the Vandera fight, at least Vandera and Acosta, like if he just punched, he could have won that fight. Like he really, really could have, but he just chose not to. I was looking at Fight Metric the other day. They said that Vandera threw 91 head strikes. I'm like, I don't know what fucking intern was counting the heads. There was no 91 head strikes thrown by Jared Vandera in that fight. Obviously, hurt him bad with kicks. I would say Chase Sherman is a better calf kicker than Jared Vandera is. Chase Sherman is faster than Jared Vandera is. Chase Sherman is a better boxer than Jared Vandera is. But this is kind of the ironic thing for me, which is probably not going to make a lot of sense to most people, because Sherman knocked Vandera out, but I think Vandera actually is more durable than Chase Sherman is. And based on how Vandera fought him, which was still kind of stupid, but it still allowed him to be competitive, he did utilize like a lot more like outside movement, and where Sherman is kind of like a stand in front of you, stick in the mud boxer who's just stands very upright, who's very available. Right. And so I think Acosta is actually much more live to knock out Chase Sherman in this fight than he was to finish Vandera, which is honestly what my main concern is. And more than anything, that's what's holding me off here. But on the flip side, I think I can expect Chase to actually go out there and fight him more than Vandera did.
Do you think Chase has a durability problem though?
I don't know if I would say it's a problem per se, but we've seen him knocked out before by more explosive guys, and he's going to eat a ridiculous amount of strikes. And like I said, it's more so the fact that he's going to be available. And the one thing with the cost is he's fast, and I think he does have pop. I think he can knock Sherman out here.
Fair. What do you think, Legs?
I would say, at least talking about that point, for me, it's a combination of both. Like, I don't think his durability is great, and that he's got a little bit of flake in it.
Yeah,
so
I'd agree with that.
And then, so for me, I was actually not looking at Sherman. I was actually looking at the over going into this. And then I'm like, I agree with all the points Luke brought up. I think Sherman is much more likely to get put out than Vandera was. But yeah, I don't know. This is definitely interesting for sure. And big talking point, obviously, is Acosta coming back. The fight is going to be 3 weeks after the Vandera fight, where his leg was pretty compromised. So
I do like the over, to be honest, Lags. That's kind of why I mentioned
it's like minus 130.
And he has been knocked out before, but it's been a long time since Sherman's been like badly hurt on the feet. Acosta could be that guy. Fight. Dude, also Luke, you mentioned the 90 strikes Vandera attempted against Acosta. Number one, I agree with you. He didn't attempt that many. He attempted 224 head strikes against Chase Sherman. What happened to that guy? It's so bizarre. But yeah, guys, I can't blame anybody for not betting Sherman, and I can't blame anybody for betting Sherman, if we're being honest here. Moving on, gross co-main event here. We got Ion Kutelaba, the Hulk, taking on Kennedy and Nzechukwu. Luke, any thoughts here?
This is another one that just gives me really weird vibes, man. Like, of potential overcorrection, of potential recency bias. Kutelaba has been a 2-1 favorite in his last 2 fights, right? And, goes out there, obviously did not perform well in either of them. And now, he's a dog to Kennedy, who, if you get a good version of Kennedy, like if you take like all the little pieces of Kennedy fights where he's looked good and you put them together and that's how he fights here, I think it's actually a pretty decent fight for him. But that's the problem. Like, he's been a guy who's been just so all over the board. Sometimes he's a slower starter. Sometimes he's a faster starter. Sometimes he can fight effectively from behind a jab. Sometimes he really struggles with effective pressure. Sometimes he is higher output. Sometimes he's not. Historically, he's never wrestled. Then we saw D1 Kennedy against Carl Roberson in the last fight, right? He's largely shown pretty good takedown defense, submission defense, that type of stuff. But I do think Kutelaba is the best pure wrestler that Kennedy's fought to date. So I think that's going to get really tested. But Kutelaba is also kind of a gas bag. I know outside of the Clark fight, which a lot of people reference, where it's like, oh, Luke, his gas looked better in that fight. It's like, yeah, because Devin Clark, despite being a decent offensive wrestler, Devin Clark's a shit defensive wrestler, and Devin Clark throws no strikes. Devin Clark's dad works harder than Devin Clark does actually fighting. So, like,
he works harder on fight night.
Yeah, like theoretically, and looking at that fight hindsight, like that was just a great matchup for Iwan Kutelaba, right? From a gas tank perspective, right? Where like if Kennedy's gonna be, whether he gets taken down or not, but and he's just, you know, stuffing or making Kutelaba have to shoot reshot, even kind of like the Jacoby fight from some perspective, and you know he's keeping a higher work rate at space. I think Kennedy's probably going to look decent, but I mean he's still a guy that. I mean, I'm not laying moderate chalk on him. I think he's starting to show elements of putting everything together, but I'm still not there with him yet to lay this kind of a price on him. I still think he's very inconsistent.
Mr. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, my thing is like with Kennedy, even though he is inconsistent, at least he's showing improvement fight to fight, whereas like Kutelaba's for me is just a gas bag, quite frankly. Like he's got about a round in him to get it done, and that's quite frankly it. So like I get it from the Kennedy side, like not playing it. If you're looking at Kennedy, I'd probably just look to live bet him. But yeah, I have no interest in this fight. This is a gross fight, quite frankly. I agree with Luke, quite frankly, that the market could be quite overcorrected here on the Kutelaba side.
I think the line's fine personally. In terms of a bet, I actually kind of like the over, to be honest. Like 1.5 minus 125. I mean, Kennedy survived 8 minutes on the ground with Danilo Marquez. I don't really think he's very likely to get finished on the mat by Kutelaba. He's also historically been very, very durable. And I think Kutelaba is going to go for and likely get takedowns early in this fight. So, I mean, the over seems pretty generous to me at 1.5. I honestly would have probably had this at like minus 150 not to go the distance. But anyway, the reason I think the line's right, just plain and simple, I'm not going to harp too much stuff. We all know the deal. Kutelaba's got really bad gas. For me to think, you know, Kennedy should be lying closer to evens, I'd have to think either a KO or early submission were very, very live. And obviously they're both live to a degree, but I don't think they're like high percentage outcomes. Or, to Luke's point, that he could just sit there and control Kennedy the way he controlled Devin Clark. But we see Kennedy does try to get up. You know, he does not accept bottom position. He will try to scramble up right away. And so, with that being the case, like, we could see something like a rerun of the Jacoby fight where he lands 5, 6, 7 takedowns early in this fight. But inevitably, you know, Kennedy's a cardio freak who's a giant and strong. He's probably going to take over this fight. I think he's more dangerous with his hands. I think he's a better technical striker. He might even be faster, if we're being honest. I just for the line to not be right, you have to have faith that Kutelaba can keep a grappling pace past a round and a half, and I just don't see the data there to support that. So, Luke.
I was just going to say, like, more so of a question, I guess, to play devil's advocate to the over. Doesn't the Johnny Walker fight for Kutelaba terrify you? Johnny Walker has historically shown no grappling upside at all, and Kutelaba, quite frankly, he made Johnny Walker look like a high-level black belt, and that like he gets put in these positions and like he's just a really bad grappler, and I think he kind of has a little bit of quit in him too, like where if he like gets into these positions, he kind of like doesn't know, like he tries originally to get out of him, and then I think he kind of almost just like succumbs. So obviously I'm not going to sit there and say we're going to see D1 Kennedy again, or he's going to be able to reverse and, you know, get on top like Walker did. I'm not saying that's like a guarantee or high percentage to happen. I'm just saying, like, theoretically, you know, I would be concerned with the over 1.5 with that dynamic too.
Yeah, but I mean, the counter to the counter would be Kennedy was on top of Carl Roberson for 10 minutes before he finished him. You
That's
know.
also a good point.
How about this?
I digress.
The counter to the counter to the counter would be Kennedy getting knocked out by Dong Jung and just kind of standing there with
That was bizarre.
taking those elbows. That was just
I still haven't really figured out what happened because like only like one strike. If you rewatch that fight, that entire finishing exchange, he gets like hit with the elbow. He seems fine. He's got his guard up,
right,
and Jung just lands like 2 elbows on the guard, and it just put him out. Like it was very very
second
strange.
one might have like went like behind the ear or something like that, and then probably put him out.
It could be. I can imagine like watching that and the Olberg fight back to back, and knowing that's the same fucking guy. Like so strange.
That's the shit I'm talking about with him, though. Like, it's hard to, get
it's hard to lay chalk on this guy.
in Camp Kennedy, Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't lay my dude. You can't. So even though I say the line is right, like you can't lay a minus number on somebody who is very likely to end up on their back for 4 to 6 minutes of this fight. So
or is alive to get nuked.
Yeah.
Who's fighting the best wrestler they fought to date?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Moving on. What a main event we have here. Another Derek Lewis main event. Dana wants to torture Derek for some reason. I don't really know why. Maybe he wants to see him make it into the 4th or 5th round one of these days and just see whether or not he has a heart attack so we can stop paying him. But we got Derek Lewis taking on Sergey Spivak, the polar bear. Lags, what do you think?
I think our last fight going into this fight was a great segue with, laying big chalk on a guy like Sergey Spivak. He's just kind of got some fleeky vibes in him, even though he does, I think, have the clear volume edge on the feet. He's got the clear wrestling path here. To me, like, I think the line is about right. Like, I think Spivak finishes him on the mat. I was hoping for a better total, quite frankly. I didn't like the over or under 1.5. I was hoping for maybe a 2.5, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I laid the chalk on Spivak in his last fight, and I was kind of ready to do it at minus 170, minus 160, and then it got hit, and it's at minus 200 now, and I'm a little less interested in it. And I am a lot, I shouldn't say a little, I'm a lot less interested in it here. I was on the fence at minus 170. The concern for me, somebody says, I think Lewis is toast. In going through his tape, because I went kind of pretty far back, because obviously the crux of this fight is how easy will it be or hard for Jimmy to get Spivak to get takedowns. But you go and watch the fights with Latifi and Livanov, and Lewis was actually fucking explosive. Like, he was pretty quick for a huge lumbering guy like that. But then you watch his last couple fights, dude, he looks slow and he looks old. Like, he's always been a little fragile, but he looks like all of the explosiveness is gone. So, and he can't grapple. We know that. Like, once Lewis ends up on his back, like, his only option is to kind of just stand up. And on the Spivak side of things, I would actually say, in terms of the entire heavyweight division, outside of like Romanov, Spivak might have the best top position game, like at heavyweight. Blade's very good on top, but he's more control. He's very rarely doing damage, whereas Spivak's very good at posturing and getting damage off. And once he's kind of got you in his takedown series, you don't really get out of it. So, like, I kind of think the big question of this fight is how easy will it be for Spivak to get inside and get takedowns? So I do think once he has his hands wrapped on Lewis, the fight may be over at that point. Like, maybe Lewis can survive around. It is Derek Lewis. The guy just refuses to die sometimes. But I think once Spivak starts landing takedowns, it's very likely the end of Lewis's offense for that round and maybe the fight. The thing for me is, even though I think Lewis is deteriorating, and even though I think Spivak on top is a very good grappler, and he's obviously a lot younger, Lewis is very fucking strong, man. And Spivak's takedowns are almost all like, if he was just shooting single legs, I'd have no doubt he's getting Lewis down. Lewis tips over from a gust of wind, but like, he likes to go for those upper body judo throws. And early in this fight, I don't know how easy it's going to be to just judo toss Derek Lewis. Like, I was impressed he was able to do it to Greg Hardy, who's a huge man, but like, Derek Lewis is a much better MMA fighter than Greg Hardy. Like, let's be honest. And if he has some issues early in this fight, man, if they exchange heavy in the pocket early, Spivak does not have great defense, and to your point, lads, is both kind of fragile and kind of wilty. So I think there's a lot of equity for Lewis to finish this fight early, is what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying. If the line came back into like that minus 160 range, I'd play Spivak. But I think there's enough upside for Lewis to kind of keep the standing, disengage, or just go to war early in the fight that, like, I'm not really looking for a Spivak entry pre-fight. Luke, what do you think?
It's a weird one, man. I think it's another fight where I think X's and O's wise, it's a pretty good fight for Sergey Spivak, but I got a bad feeling about this one. I got a bad feeling that old black beast is gonna conjure up one of them big haymakers. I know that's kind of shit analysis, but I just got this feeling in the pit of my gut, man, that he might. To your point, I mean, it's been the bigger explosive guys that have given Spivak the biggest issues pretty much throughout his entire career. It's obviously kind of just where Lewis is at, but kind of with you, John, because of the dynamic, I actually did go back and I watched a ton of the fights that had wrestling against for Lewis. And the one glaring thing that I noticed in like allowing Lewis to kind of just have the fuck it get up defense is largely when guys get too over aggressive, they either move to side control, which is obviously not an optimal control position, really, at least to also be able to land strikes, or then guys passed him out, and it's like Derek, he's so big, like he just bucks guys. Really, the only guy to have like consistent control mount success against him was DC, but I mean that's DC, and then also kind of getting in back hooks on him. Very few guys have been able to do that and actually be able to maintain, right? But when guys have like actually locked down half guards on him, we saw that, I guess, and I think it was components in like the Latifi fight and a couple other ones. If guys just sit and lock down a half guard on Lewis, he's not going anywhere, right? It's just when guys, like I said, they either get into side control and they're threatening like shitty key locks, and Derek Lewis is like, hold my fucking beer. You're not going to do shit to my arm. Or they mount him and they start trying to throw strikes and he bucks him or whatever. But I think Spivak obviously has good ground and pound, but I think he's going to be like pretty processed here in terms of how he approaches. I don't think he's actually going to get too over aggressive in passing. I think he's probably actually going to sit there and lock down a half guard, chip away at Derek, and then probably finish him in like the back half of the second, early third. Because that's the thing with Spivak too, and why my tinfoil hat take, I guess it's not like super tinfoil hatish because it's kind of 50-50. I have some interest in the over 1.5. I think 5 of Spivak's W's have gone over 1.5. In 8 of 13 fights that Lewis has conceded a takedown in have gone over 1.5 rounds. So I think that's interesting. I was hoping that I was going to get a bigger plus number on it, but at Pick'em, I'm probably gonna hold off. But I do think this fight actually potentially extends a little bit. Obviously, assuming Spivak doesn't go out there and just die on like the first exchange or something. But like, yeah, I don't know. Interesting fight. I don't really have much interest in laying it with Spivak. It logically makes sense, but there's still some weird shit in my mind.
Yeah, agreed. Real quick, Mel asked thoughts on Whaley wrestling. Yeah, I mean, I thought it looked improved. I thought there were still some issues on bottom that I thought were somewhat concerning. But yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, her offensive wrestling looks very, very good. Obviously, her grappling looked good. Not really a lot to add. I think she's getting better. She's clearly working at it. So we'll see the next fight. But there really aren't many other women in that division who are going to present the wrestling threat that Carla does. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
I think you summed that up well. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so that's going to do it. Hopefully, like I said, I got 2 bets. I think we all are pretty limited in our bets. I might make a couple more.
Hey.
We'll see what happens.
Even though it's not a great UFC card, the World Cup is coming up. And even though Tony Cruz isn't playing for Germany, Germany's plus 1,000. So go get some 10-1 out there on Germany. Have yourself some fun. Get some nice Christmas presents.
Legs throwing it out there for the people. Germany 10-1. I'll put a couple times on that. All right, guys. But that'll do it for the guard today. We'll be back same time. Actually, no, we won't be back same time next week because we have another week off. We will be back the same time in 2 weeks at 7 p.m. Eastern. As usual, you got me, John, at MMA Fox, Luke at SWR_betting, and Lags at Danny_Lags. Guys, if you enjoy the show, please drop a like and subscribe. We appreciate it. And yeah, good luck this weekend, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Peace.